Always make the call. Something doesn't look, feel, sound, smell right. You make the call. This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Operation Anteater, Part 22. When we left off, Sincere was swimming with the fishes. Saint had honored his word. He not only kept the promise that he made to the 5 families, that he would not be the one to solve their Sincere problem, but he would help them find him. He also kept his word to Natalia, that he'd pray and he'd follow the instructions that he received as a result. The only thing he'd heard when he prayed was Cain had to live with killing Abel. And while Sincere was not innocent, and Saint was not the one with envy in his heart, he knew that, like Cain, if he was the one to deal the death blow to his older brother, no matter how justified he might feel, the day would come when he would have to live with his own brother's blood on his hands. When he'd taken Natalia and Summer back to the safe house where he'd been stashed, Courtney was there waiting. She was on her way out of town, but she told Saint that she'd made Sincere a promise, and she intended to keep it. So when the rubber met the road, if the opportunity ever presented itself, he needed to take advantage of that opportunity and tap her in. So he did. And it would have taken God or an act of Congress to keep Courtney from pulling up in Cancun. The round table was on recess until the Sincere issue was addressed. And since neither she nor Ezra were a part of the teams who were responsible for locating him, they decided that they'd take a little trip. It just so happened that they'd gotten the tap, that Cancun was the perfect place for a vacation. Ezra knew exactly why they were there. But if any questions were ever asked, he was on vacation with his lady. So early the following morning, Saint powered his phone back on, saw the text that he'd missed from Natalia, and sent several of his own. He was on his way back to Miami, and either she or someone who could fill him in and get him to her needed to be at the Lopez airstrip in 2 hours when he arrived. When Natalia saw his text messages, she was relieved that he was on his way back and unsettled by how they'd gotten there. The text messages were just strange. It took her several reads to get it, though. When her father was attempting to prepare her for Saint's return from federal prison, he'd said that there would be times when Saint's behavior just wouldn't make sense. He'd need time alone. At times when she'd expect that being together would be preferred. During those times, he'd need to disconnect, just to stay sane, to protect his own peace. And clearly, this was such a time. She didn't know what he'd done, where he'd gone, or how she was expected to show up. But she did know that Sincere was no longer a factor, because the night before, Angela had called her. She said everything went well, Saint was fine, and he was headed home. Hearing that, Natalia called Saint, but he didn't answer. So she sent him a text message. The first one went through, but the second one turned green, which either meant he no longer had a signal, he'd powered his phone off, or he'd blocked her. While he'd prevent her from being able to contact him, she was not 100% sure. So she called back and went straight to voicemail. And before she could decide how to feel, she got another call from Angela. Angela said, "Natalia, I spoke out of turn. Saint is not on his way back. He's gonna head back in the morning." Natalia asked why. If Saint was hurt, Angela said, "Physically, no. I'm sure that he will explain it all when he gets back." Natalia asked if Angela had told Saint about the situation with Chantal, and Angela said she hadn't. She figured that was something better explained in person. Saint had more than enough on his mind that he already needed to process. The fact that he was not rushing home said that he was already carrying all the weight he could stand. So realizing that she didn't know what to say, how to say it, or how to feel about Saint's need to disconnect and what that must have meant about what he'd done to ensure that Sincere was no longer an issue, she sent Star in a chauffeured car to meet Saint at the Lopez airstrip. When Saint landed at the Lopez airstrip and hopped in the chauffeured car, he saw his sister Star, looking like she'd been up all night long, 'cause she had. And then she informed him that Chantal had attempted to take her own life. Natalia had managed to save her, but she was in the ICU. And Gretchen had told them all that she told Chantal that Sincere had essayed her when she was 9 years old, Star said. And the gag is, Gretchen's revelation was not new information to Chantal. She was there when it happened and just didn't remember. Then Star told Saint a whole lot about Chantal's life growing up that he didn't know about, including her dating life or lack thereof, and her relationship with Christ. She said, Chantal's been struggling with her faith for years. She always believed God would send her a good man. Then she learned about our Father and about her pastor. So when Randy started pushing up, trying to court her, she was too scared to even give him a chance. Saint said, who? Star said, the cornball dude from her church. The one I told you is in love with her. That's why she was so quick to agree to stay in Texas, so she could avoid him. Chantal keeps a lot bottled up. She is not as strong as she pretends, and she thinks she knows God, but she knows religion, and the two are not synonymous. So that's how we got here. Chantal couldn't handle knowing what Sincere did on top of all of that, and she does not want to live in a world where these are the kind of men we have to choose from. Then it all made sense to Saint. Gretchen's assault being revealed was the catalyst for Chantal's attempt. But the assault itself had been the catalyst for Chantal's immersion into the apostolic faith. When Saint got to the hospital, Simone wasn't there because she was at the other hospital with Janelle and the baby. They were getting ready to be discharged. Summer was with Chantal, and Natalia was waiting for him at the door. Natalia didn't even address the elephant in the room. She said, can you please have Miss Miracle, Simone, and Janelle brought here? This family needs to be together and we need to pray. While they waited for Simone, Janelle, the baby, and Miss Miracle to arrive, Saint said, I'm sorry, I couldn't talk last night. Natalia said, I understand. I just pray you didn't do anything you can't live with. Saint said, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. I did everything I could to get my brother to come back. He chose. I hate how this turned out, but I kept my word. I said I wouldn't be the one to end it all, and I wasn't. But I just lost my only brother, and I still have another really difficult decision to make. I knew when I saw you calling that it was bad news. I didn't need that. But that does not mean that if ever I'm offline, you shouldn't make the call. Saint grabbed Natalia by the face, stared her in the eyes, and said, always make the call. Let me decide whether I can pick up. Natalia said, but you're giving me mixed messages here. Saint said, the only message you need to remember is in any situation, crisis or otherwise, something doesn't look, feel, sound, smell right. You make the call. If I don't answer, you follow your instincts. And if you can't call anybody else, you can call Angela. She has shown that she's trustworthy, that she cares about you, and that she isn't tainted by generations of Five Family machinations. When I left you in summer at the safe house and headed to the family complex to sit my sisters down, Angela met me at the gate. She told me about the work she's been doing to reorganize and change how the Five Families do business. She also told me something that no one else knows, so no one could have told her. She's a praying woman. She's exactly the type of woman who you and I both need to get through all of the things that are coming next. Meanwhile, at the family complex in Denton, Texas, Hugh was rushing to get to an important meeting. And that's what he told Angela when she said, babe, we need to be a united front tomorrow at the round table. We need to talk. And before she could finish, Hugh cut her off, wrapped his tie around his neck, and faced his wife so that she could tie it. He could certainly tie his own tie. But this was one of the small things that he did to maintain their intimacy, and she did because acts of service were her husband's love language. Hugh said, love, Edra's gonna make his announcement. There will be discussion about the pros and cons. When it's all said and done, the vote will be taken, and whatever it is, that's what it will be. Angela said, I understand that, and I know that I don't get a vote, but I think we should discuss our position. I'm concerned that Angela had made quick work of the tie, and once again, Q cut her off, slid his feet into his shoes, and said, we're beating a dead animal, and I gotta go. Angela said, so when are we going to discuss it? Q said, you're trying to stop a train going 300 miles per hour in 3 seconds, and that's not gonna happen. You're worrying because you want to, not because you have to. Then he did the motion that had been cemented as theirs, and Angela obliged. They kissed, and he left. Angela could not have been more frustrated. For months, when they were both home, she and her husband had been ships passing one another in the night. And when one or the other of them wasn't at home, they'd been moving on separate agendas. She'd had no clue where Michael was. He clearly had known where Michael was and wasn't saying, and was expecting her to give him her blind trust. Then, during the round table, he'd explained it all away while walking to his mother's villa. And as soon as they hit the door, before she could even respond, they were having a video conference with Michael. When the call ended and she shared her concerns, he said she was focused on the wrong thing. Sometimes they had to settle for the lesser of two evils, and this was such a time. Everything was under control. She didn't need to worry, and it would all work out in the end. when they'd both had their separate conversations with Melissa, and he'd elaborated on his conversation with Michael. Her concerns were not alleviated. He'd just given her more things to be concerned about. And once again, dismissed those concerns, telling her that she didn't have to worry, she was choosing to. He was beginning to sound like a broken record, and this was becoming a pattern that Angela was determined to break, because she was determined to have her say. Now, one of the conversations that they'd had in the last 3 or 4 months ended after she'd shared the totality of her concerns, the basis for them, or possible solutions to them. While he was the head of their household and the St. James organization, at least for now, she was still his wife, the mother of his children, and an individual with an opinion and an expectation that her husband would hear her out, that he'd listen without outright dismissing her concerns before she fully got them out. She felt like he was treating her like a problem he needed to solve or a battle he needed to win. And that wasn't how they'd agreed to do marriage. She understood he was busy, but being busy was not an excuse to disregard, dismiss, or debate the validity of her feelings, her concerns, or her position. And that's precisely what she was going to tell him when he got his behind home. Meanwhile, Q made it to his meeting just in time. When he did, his supervisor was already there. The Dallas field office supervisor Acevedo was patiently waiting for Q and the parents of one Richard Marrow, also known as Ricky and commonly known by his friends as Spider. Supervisor Acevedo had been reviewing the fake paperwork that he and Q would be providing to Spider's parents when they arrived to hear Q's proposal be allowed to groom their son for leadership in the Five Families under the guise of him joining an FBI youth training program. And Justice Supervisor Acevedo said that he was satisfied with the paperwork that Q had drawn up and that it would not trace back to him or the team. Spider's parents entered the room. Q made the introductions, and when everyone was seated at the table, Q ran down all of Spider's educational accomplishments and the talents and skills that led Q to believe that he would be perfect for enrollment in a top-secret FBI youth training program, where high school students graduated with their class, were able to attend the college of their choice, all while participating in training to become a special agent. The caveat was that they'd be required to leave home. All expenses would be covered by the feds. They'd remain in contact with their parents, even be able to come home to visit during some school breaks. Spider would be under constant adult supervision, and Q would be his handler. Their contact when Spider was offline, and the go-between in the event that any information needed to be exchanged between him and his parents when he was unavailable. Spider would have opportunities to learn new languages, study abroad, learn vital skills, and pursue his own passions, all on the government's dime. Once he graduated college, though, communication with his parents would be completely on him. And when Q was done, Spider's parents were overjoyed that their son had such a prestigious opportunity. This was right down there and Ricky's alley, because Mr. Marrow was a retired military corporal, Mrs. Marrow had recently retired from law enforcement, and Ricky had always dreamed of becoming an FBI agent. They'd heard of programs like this one, but had never heard any real details because, of course, such programs were top secret. Their only real questions were if they had time to discuss it with Ricky and if there would be paperwork. Q told them that, of course, they had time to discuss it with Ricky, but it was important that they not discuss it with anyone else, and he would absolutely need an answer no later than after Melissa's Sweet 16 party. Mrs. Marrow said, "Speaking of Melissa's Sweet 16, we had some questions that we plan to discuss with Mrs. St. James before RSVP. I don't know how we feel about Ricky traveling to Puerto Rico, unaccompanied and spending the weekend there, considering how close he and your daughter are." Q said, "I share your concerns, which is why he'll be supervised the entire time. And you and your husband both are free to join him, at our expense, of course, because we can use all the eyes we can get on all of the children. That will also give you an opportunity to see how the FBI secures its employees. Because of my work, the party and all the other events and excursions that are planned will be highly secured." Spider's father said, "That makes sense. It also explains why Ricky told us that your property is always crawling with soldiers." Q said, "The number of security on our property ebbs and flows based on the cases that I'm handling. I just finished a very important case. Now that it's been wrapped up, and now that my role with the FBI is transitioning from the field to this training program, we no longer need as much security." Then Ricky's father said, "I guess that also explains why Michael's been being homeschooled for a while now. And Q said all of our children were temporarily transitioned to homeschool due to that same case. All of them will be heading back to in-person school. But Michael's decided he prefers to keep things the way that they are. Then Spider's mother said, this important case that you were working on, that wouldn't happen to be that international trafficking case that's been all over the news. The one that the congressman and my old chief were caught up in. And then Supervisor Acevedo cut in. He said, I think that it goes without saying that we don't discuss federal cases, and everything we've discussed here today should be handled with confidentiality and the same discretion with which you handled your involvement in the investigation of your old chief, which led to your retirement. The same way you don't want anyone to know that you were involved in that, no one can ever know that your son is involved in this. You asked if there would be paperwork. I have that paperwork here for your review, but that paperwork can't leave this office. And you'll both need to sign NDAs before you leave here today, regardless of what decision you make. Meanwhile, in Miami, when everyone was assembled, they all gathered at Chantal's bedside. When Saint saw his sister hooked up to all the machines, he fell apart. Natalia comforted him. When he was able to pull himself together, he looked around the room and said, Sincere will never hurt another living soul again. I can't change what he's done, but I can ensure that men like him don't find a safe haven in the St. James organization or in this family going forward. Natalia asked that we all gather here to pray. Then Natalia said, yes, I did, but I also need to say something. Then she looked around the room while saying, every one of us has been forced to be strong before we thought we were ready. I didn't grow up in the environment that you all did, or have the type of parents that you all had. But it's not hard to tell that the lives you each lived were not easy by any stretch of the imagination. The great thing, though, is that while each of you have had to carry burdens that weren't yours, you figured out how to survive them. Maybe you didn't always make the right decisions, because none of us do. You did what you could with what you had and handled what you'd inherited the best way that each of you knew how. Not one of you did anything to earn the experiences you've had up to this moment. Up until this moment, other people's choices have been allowed to become generational curses that have run rampant in your lives and the lives of people you love. Then she said while looking at Simone, the pain from those choices has led some of you to drugs, some to give up on life out of hopelessness, while looking at Chantal in her hospital bed, some to be self-proclaimed wild children, while looking at Star, some to have to raise fatherless children, while looking at Janelle and Summer, and some to try to carry this whole family's burdens on their backs, while looking at Saint and Miss Miracle. That can all end now. Today, we can all make a conscious decision that we will not continue these cycles. We can pray and leave it all at the Father's feet and vow to do the work, to uncover the wounds that are still festering under the surface, heal the traumas that cause us to stumble, to turn to substances, destructive behaviors, and overcompensate and be a family, faults, flaws, and all, but ever evolving, committed to this family, the children coming up behind us, and the love that we've managed to forge in the midst of so many storms. If we don't find a way to lay our burdens down, to just say, this is too much for me, it's too heavy for me to carry alone, and lean on one another, we will be exactly where Chantal is, or worse. We'll watch our children end up wherever Sincere is. Miss Miracle looked at Natalia and said, you, my dear, are wise beyond your years. When everyone tearfully agreed to dedicate themselves to fighting the curses and not themselves or one another, Janelle said, can I ask a favor? I don't know what Catherine has done, but she's been good to me. All of y'all were running around doing whatever y'all were doing. She was right here with me, making sure I ate when I didn't even want to. I was too depressed to even wash my own behind. She dragged me out of bed, threw me in a shower, and washed it for me. She kept me occupied, while Sincere kept himself occupied. She even helped me patch things up with Star. I was mad at her when she sicked that little heifer on Jerome, trying to get him to sleep with her because I wouldn't give it up. But then I realized she was just trying to protect me, trying to keep me from getting hurt again. She may have a sneaky, backhanded way of doing the things that she does, but I don't believe that she sets out to hurt people. As a matter of fact, I know like I know I'm black, that she loves y'all. Y'all gotta remember that she survived trauma too. She told me about how her father basically used her as a bargaining chip when she was 14 years old, arranging a marriage with y'all daddy. And the whole time he was screwing everybody else and even created y'all five. She had to sneak to find out about y'all and to make sure y'all were taken care of. And she did her best to help y'all find yourselves. It's not her fault that Sincere found the wrong version of himself. He'd already found that version before he met her. Saint, you may have had to do things you didn't want to do, but you've got to admit that she was right about you being the right one to do it. Maybe she went about it all wrong, but she hasn't been wrong. Saint said, "What's your point, Janelle?" Janelle said, "My point is maybe y'all should give her another chance." Saint said, "I don't know about that." Miss Miracle said, "We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." Just think about it, Saint. When no one else said anything else, Miss Miracle looked around the room and said, "All minds and hearts clear." Then she prayed. She prayed over Chantal, over each of the young people in that room, and for the new family that had just been created, solely by virtue of love and not blood. Shortly thereafter, the doctor came in to give them an update. He said, "There is brain activity. The scans suggest that her brain is firing on all cylinders. In layman's terms, it's a waiting game, and it's all on her. We won't have a clear picture until she regains consciousness, and we can't say when that will be. When that does happen, we think it's best that she be moved to a facility where she can get the mental help that she clearly needs so that she doesn't find herself back in this position again."
You don't gotta say it, I see it already. That weight on your chest, you carry it daily. Don't let it break you, I know it get heavy. You've been too quiet, holding it steady. You don't gotta say it, I see it already.